Then all of a sudden there was a tremendous explosion of oaths and other noises. The chair and the table went over in a lump, a clash of steel followed, and then a cry of pain. And the next instant I saw a black dog in full flight, and the captain hotly pursuing, both with drawn cutlasses, and the former streaming blood from one left shoulder. Just at the door, the captain aimed at the fugitive one last tremendous cut, which would have certainly have split him to the chine, had it not been intercepted by our big signboard of Admiral Benbow. You may see the notch on the lower side of the frame to this day. That blow was the last of the battle. Once out upon the road, Black Dog, in spite of his wound, showed a wonderful clean pair of heels and disappeared over the edge of the hill in half a minute. The captain, for his part, stood staring at the signboard like a bewildered man. Then he passed his hand over his eyes several times, and at last turned back into the house. "Jim," says he, "rum." And as he spoke, he reeled a little and caught himself with one hand against the wall. "Are you hurt?" cried I. "Rum," he repeated. "I must get away from here. Rum, rum." I ran to fetch it, but I was quite unsteadied by all had fallen out, and I broke one glass and fouled the tap, and while I was still getting on my way, I heard a loud fall in the parlor, and running in, beheld the captain lying full length upon the floor. At the same instant my mother, alarmed by the cries and fighting, came running downstairs to help me. Between us, we raised his head. He was breathing very loud and hard, but his eyes were closed and his face a horrible color. "Dear, dearie me," cried my mother, "what a disgrace upon this house, and you poor father sick." In the meantime, we had no idea what to do to help the captain, nor any other thought about that he had got his death hurt in the scuffle with a stranger. I got the rum, to be sure, and I tried to put it down his throat, but his teeth were tightly shut and his jaws as strong as iron. It was happy relief for us when the door opened and the Dr. Livesey came in on his visit to my father. "Oh, doctor," cried we, "what shall we do? Where is the wounded?" "Wounded? A fiddlestick end," said the doctor. "No more wounded than you or I. The man had a stroke, as I warned him. Now, Mr. Hawkins, just you run upstairs to your husband and tell him, if possible, nothing about it. For my part, I must do my best to save this fellow's terribly worthless life. Jim, you get me a basin." When I got back with the basin, the doctor had already ripped out the captain's sleeve and exposed a great sinewy arm. It was tattooed in several places. "Here's luck, a fair wind, and Billy Bones is fancy," where he's very neatly and clearly executed on the forearm, and up near the shoulder there was a sketch of a gallows and a man hanging from it, done, as I thought, with a great spirit. "Prophetic," said the doctor, touching this picture with his finger. "And now, Master Billy Bones, if that be your name, we'll have a look at the color of your blood." "Jim," he said, "are you afraid of blood?" "No, sir," said I. "Well then," said he, "you hold the basin." And with that look, his lancet, and opened the vein. A great deal of blood was taken before the captain opened his eyes and looked mistily about him. First he recognized the doctor, and with an unmistakable frown. Then his glance fell upon me, and he looked relieved. But suddenly his color changed, and he tried to raise himself, crying, "Where is Black Dog?" "There is no Black Dog here," said the doctor, "except that you have on your own back. You have been drinking rum. You have had a stroke, precisely as I told you, and have I just, very much against my own will, dragged you head foremost out of the grave. Now, Mr. Bones—" "That's not my name," he interrupted. "Much I care," returned the doctor. "It's the name of a buccaneer of my acquaintance, and I called you by it for the sake of shortness. And what I have to say to you is this: one glass of rum won't kill you, but if you take one, you'll take another and another, and I stake my wig, if you don't break off short, you will die. Do you understand that?" Die and go to your own place, like the man in the Bible. Come now, make an effort. I'll help you in your bed for once. Between us, with much trouble, we managed to hoist him upstairs and laid him on his bed, where his head fell back on the pillows as if he were almost fainting. Now, mind you, said the doctor, I clear my conscience. The name of rum for you is death. And with that, he went off to see my father, taking me with him by the arm. There is nothing, he said, as soon as we had closed the door. I have drawn blood enough to keep him quiet a while. He should lie for a week where he is. That is the best thing for him, and you, with another stroke, will settle him. The Black Spot. About noon, I stopped at the captain's door with some cooling drinks and medicines. He was lying very much as we had left him, only a little higher, and he seemed both weak and excited. Jim, he said, you're the only one here that's worth anything, and you know I've been always good to you. Never a month, but I've given you a silver fourpenny for yourself. And now you see, mate, I'm pretty low and deserted by all. And Jim, you'll bring me one noggin of rum now, won't you, matey? The doctor, I began, but he broke the cursing the doctor in a feeble voice but heartily. Doctors is all swabs, he said, and that doctor there, why? What does he know about seafaring men? I've been in places hot as pitch and mates roping around the Yellow Jack. And in the blessed land, a haven like the sea with the earthquakes. What do the doctor know of lands like this? And I lived on rum, I tell you. It's been meat and drink and man and wife to me. If I'm not to have my rum now, I'm a poor old hulk on the lee shore. My blood would be on you, Jim. And that doctor swabbed, and he ran on again for a while with curses. Look, Jim, how my fingers fidges. He continued in the pledging tones. I can't keep them still, not I. I haven't had a drop of this blessed day. The doctor's a fool, I tell you. If I don't have a dram of rum, Jim, I'll have the horrors. I've seen some of them already. I've seen old Flint in the corner there, behind you, as plain as sprint. I've seen him. If I get the horrors, I'm a man that lived rough, and I'll raise Cain. Your doctor said, one glass wouldn't hurt me. I'll give you a golden guinea for a noggin, Jim. He was growing more and more excited, and this alarmed me for my father, who was very low that day and needed quiet besides. I was reassured by the doctor's words, now quoted to me, and rather offended by the offer of a bribe. I want none of your money, said I, but what you owe my father. I'll get you one glass and no more. When I brought it to him, he seized it greedily and drank it out. Aye, said he, that's some better, sure enough. And now, matey, did the doctor say how long I was to lie here in this old bed? A week at last, said I. Thunder, he cried, a week. I can't do that. They have the black spot on me, my man. The labbers is going about to get the wind of me this blessed moment. Labbers as couldn't keep that they got, and want to nail what is another's. Now, that's seamanly behavior now. I want to know. But I'm a saving soul. I never wasted my good money of mine, nor lost it either. And I'll trick them again. I'm not afraid on them. I'll shake out another reef, matey, and tattle them again. As he was thus speaking, he had risen from the bed with great difficulty, holding to my shoulder with a grip that almost made me cry out, and moving his leg like so much dead weight. His words, spirited as they were in the meaning, contrasted sadly with the weakness of the voice in which they were uttered. He paused when he had gotten to the sitting position on the edge. The doctor's done me, he murmured. My ears is singing. Lay me back. Before I could do much to help him, he had fallen back against his former place, where he lay for a while silent. Jim, he said at length, you saw that seafaring man today. Black dog, I asked. Ah, black dog, says he. He's a bad one, and it's worth that put him on. Now, if I can't get away, know how. And they tip me the black spot, mind you. It's my old sea chest they're after. You get on a horse, can't you? Well, then you get on a horse and go to, yes, I will, to that eternal doctor swab and tell him to pipe all the hands, magistrates and sea, and he'll lay them aboard of the Admiral Benhoe, all old Flint's crew, man and boy, all on them that's left. I was first mate, old Flint's first mate, and I'm only one as knows the place. He gave it to me at Savannah when he was laying it high, like if I was to now, you see. But you won't peach unless they get this black spot on me, or unless you see that the black dog again, or a seafaring man with one leg, Jim. All him above all. But what is the black spot, Captain? I asked. That's a salmon's mate. I tell you, if they get that. But you keep your weather eye open, Jim, and I'll show you with you equals upon your honors. He wondered a little longer, his voice growing weaker, but soon after I had given him his medicine, which he took like a child, with the remark, if ever a seaman wanted drugs, it's me. He fell at last into a heavy, swoon-like sleep, in which I left him. What I should have done, had all gone well, I do not know. Probably I should have told the whole story to the doctor, for I was in the mortal fear lest the captain should repent of his confessions and make an end of me. But as things fell out, my poor father died quite suddenly that evening, which put all other matters on one side. Our natural distress, the visits of the neighbors, the arranging of the funeral, and all the work of the inn to be carried on in the meanwhile kept me so busy that I had scarcely time to think of the captain, far less to be afraid of him. He got downstairs next morning, to be sure, and had his meals as usual, though he ate little and had more, I'm afraid, than his usual supply for he helped himself out of the bar, scolding and blowing through his nose, and no one dared to cross him. On the night before the funeral, he was as drunk as ever, and it was shocking, in that house of mourning, to hear him singing away at his ugly old sea song. But weak as he was, we were all in the fear of death for him, and the doctor was suddenly taken up with a case many miles away, and was never near the house after my father's death. I have said the captain was weak, and indeed he seemed rather to grow weaker than regain his strength. He clambered up and down stairs and went from the parlor to the bar and back again, and sometimes put his nose out of the doors to smell the sea, holding on the walls as he went for support, and breathing hard and fast like a man on a steep mountain. He never particularly addressed me, and it is my belief that he has as good as forgotten his confidences, but his temper was more flighty, and allowing for his bodily weakness, more violent than ever. He had an alarming way now, when he was drunk, of drawing his cutlass and laying it bare before him in the table. But with all that, he minded people less and seemed shut up in his own thoughts and rather wandering. Once, for instance, to our extreme wonder, he piped out a different air, a kind of country love song that he must have learned in his youth before he began to follow the sea. So things passed until the day after the funeral, and about 3 o'clock of a bitter, foggy, frosty afternoon, I was standing at the door for a moment, full of sad thoughts about my father, when I saw someone drawing slower near along the road. He was plainly blind, for he taped before him with a stick and wore a great green shade over his eye and nose, and he was hunched as if with age or weakness, and wore a huge old tattered sea cloak with a hood that made him appear positively deformed. I never saw in my life a more dreadful looking figure. He stopped a little from the inn, and raising his voice in an odd singing song, addressed the air in front of him. Will any kind friend inform a poor blind man, who who has lost the precious sight of his eyes in the gracious defense of his native country, England, and God bless King George, where or in what part of this country he may be. You are the Admiral Benbow, Black Hill Cove, my good man, said I. I hear a voice, said he, a young voice. Will you give me a hand, my kind young friend, and lead me in? I held out my hand, and the horrible, soft-spoken, eyeless creature gripped it in a moment like a vice. I was so much startled that I struggled to withdraw, but the blind man pulled me close to him with a single action of his arm. Now, boy, he said, take me in to the captain. Sir, said I, upon my word I dare not. Oh, he sneers, that's it. Take me in straight or I'll break your arm. And he gave it as he spoke, a wrench that made me cry out. Sir, said I, it is for yourself I mean. The captain is not what he used to be. He sits with a drawn cutlass. Another gentleman. Come on now. March, interrupted he, and I never heard a voice so cruel and cold and ugly as that blind man. It caught me more than the pain, and I began to obey him at once, walking straight in at the door and towards the parlor, where our sick old buccaneer was sitting, dazed with rum. The blind man clung close to me, holding me in one iron fist and leaning almost more of his weight on me than I could carry. Lead me straight up to him, and my numb view cry out, here's a friend for you, Bill. If you don't, I'll do this. And with that, he gave me a twitch that I thought would have made me faint. Between this and that, I was so utterly terrified of the blind beggar that I forgot my terror of the captain, and as I opened the parlor door, cried out the words that he had ordered in a trembling voice. The poor captain raised his eyes, and at one look the rum went out of him and left him staring sober. The expression of his face was not so much of terror as of mortal sickness. He made a movement to rise, but did not believe he had enough force left in his body. Now, Bill, sit where you are, said the beggar. If I can't see, I can hear a finger stirring. Business is business. Hold out your left hand. Boy, take his left hand by the wrist and bring it near to my right. We both obeyed him to the letter, and I saw him pass something from the hollow of the hand that held his stick into the palm of the captain's, which closed upon it instantly. And now that's done, said the blind man, and at the words he suddenly left hold of me, and with incredible accuracy and nimbleness skipped out of the parlor into the road, whereas I stood motionless. I could hear his stick go tap 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 into the distance. It was some time before either I or the captain seemed to gather our senses, but at the length and about the same moment I released his wrist, which I was still holding, and he drew in his hand and looked sharply into the palm. 10 o'clock, he cried. 6 hours. We'll do them yet. And he sprang into his feet. Even as he did so, he reeled, put his hand into his throat, stood sway for a moment, and then with a peculiar sound fell from his whole height face foremost to the floor. I ran to him at once, calling to my mother, but haste was all in vain. The captain had been struck dead by the thundering apoplexy. It is a curious thing to understand, for I had certainly never liked the man, though of late I had begun to pity him. But as soon as I saw that he was dead, I burst into the flood of tears. It was the second death I had known, and the sorrow of the first was still fresh in my heart. The sea chest. I lost no time, of course, in telling my mother all that I knew, and perhaps should have told her long before. And we saw ourselves at once in a difficult and dangerous position. Some of the man's money, if he had any, was certainly due to us, but it was not likely that our captain's shipmates, above all the 2 specimens seen by me, Black Dog and the Blind Beggar, would be inclined to give up their booty in the payment of the dead man's debts. The captain's order to mount at once and ride for Dr. Livesey would have left my mother alone and unprotected, which was not to be thought of. Indeed, it seems impossible for either of us to remain much longer in the house. The fall of coals in the kitchen grate, the very ticking of the clock filled us with alarms. The neighborhood, to our ears, seemed haunted by the approaching footsteps, and what between the dead body of the captain on the parlor floor and the thought of that detestable blind beggar hovering near at hand and ready to return. There were moments when, as saying goes, I jumped in my skin for terror. Something must speedily be resolved upon, and it occurred to us at last to go forth together and seek help in the neighboring hamlet. No sooner had set them down, bareheaded as we were, we ran out at once in the gathering evening and the frosty fog. The hamlet lay not many 100 yards away, though out of view, on the other side of the next cove, and what greatly encouraged me, it was in the opposite direction from whence the blind man had made his appearance, and whither he had presumably returned. We were not many minutes on the road, though we sometimes stopped to lay hold of each other and hearken. But there was no unusual sound, nothing but the low wash of the ripple and the croaking of the inmates of the wood. It was already candlelight when we reached the hamlet, and I shall never forget how much I was cheered to see the yellow shine in the doors and windows. But that, as it proved, was the best of help we were likely to get in that quarter, for you would have thought men would have been ashamed of themselves. No soul would consent to return with us to the Admiral Benbow. The more we told of our troubles, the more men, women, and child they clung to the shelter of their houses. The name of Captain Flint, though it was strange to me, was well known to some there and carried a great weight of terror. Some of the men who had been in the field work on the far side of the Admiral Benbow remembered, besides, to have seen several strangers on the road, and taking them to be smugglers, to have bolted away, and one of the least had seen a little lugger in what we called Kit's Hole. For that matter, anyone who was comrade of the captain was enough to frighten them to death. And the short and the long of the matter was that while we could get several who were willing enough to ride to Dr. Livesey's, which lay in the other direction, not one would help us to defend the inn. They say cowardice is infectious, but then the argument is, on the other hand, a great emboldener. And so, when we had each had said his way, my mother made them a speech. She would not, she declared, lose money that belonged to her fatherless boy. If none of the rest of you dare, she said, Jim and I dare, back we will go, and go the way we came. And small thanks to you big, hulking, chicken-hearted men. We'll have the chest open if we die for it, and I'll thank you for the bag, Mr. Crossley, to bring back our lawful money in. Of course, I said I would go with my mother, and of course they all cried out at our foolhardiness. But even then not a man would go along with us. All they would do was to give me a loaded pistol, lest we were attacked, and to promise to have horses readily saddled in case we were pursued on our return, while one lad was to ride forward to the doctors in search of the armed assistants. My heart was beating finely when we two set forth in the cold night upon this dangerous venture. A full moon was beginning to rise and peered redly through the upper edges of the fog, and this increased our haste, for it was plain, before we came forth again, that all would be as bright as day, and our departure exposed to the eyes of any watchers. We slipped along the hedges, noiseless and swift, nor did we see or hear anything to increase our terrors, till, to our relief, the door of Admiral Benbow had closed behind us. I slipped the bolt at once, and we stood and panted for a moment in the dark, alone in the house with the dead captain's body. Then my mother got a candle in the bar, and holding each other's hand, we advanced to the parlor. He lay as we had left him, on his back, with his eyes opened and one arm stretched out. "Throw down the blind, Jim," whispered my mother. "They might come and watch outside." "And now," said she, when I had done so, "we have to get the key off that, and who's to touch it, I would like to know." And she gave a kind of sob as she said the words. I went down on my knees at once, on the floor close to his hand. There was a little round of paper, blackened on one side. I could not doubt that this was the black spot, and taking it up, I found written on the other side in a very good, clear hand, this short message: "You have till 10 tonight." "He had till 10, mother," said I, and just as I said it, our old clock began striking. The sudden noise startled us shockingly, but the news was good, for it was only 6. "Now, Jim," she said, "that key." I felt in his pockets one after another. A few small coins, a thimble and some thread and big needles, a piece of pigtail tobacco bitten away at the end, his gully with a crooked handle, a pocket compass and a tinder box were all that they were containing, and I began to despair. "Perhaps it's around his neck," suggested my mother. Overcoming a strong repugnance, I tore open his shirt at the neck, and there, sure enough, hanging to a bit of tarry string, which I cut with his own gully, we found the key. At this triumph, we were filled with hope and hurried upstairs without delay to the little room where he had been sleeping so long, and where his box had stood since the day of his arrival. It was like any other seaman's chest on the outside, the initial B burned on the top of it with a hot iron, and the corners somewhat smashed and broken by as long as rough usage. "Give me the key," said my mother, and thought the lock was very stiff. She had turned it and thrown back the lid in a twinkling. A strong smell of tobacco and tar rose from the interior, but nothing was to be seen on the top except a suit of very good clothes, carefully brushed and folded. They had never been worn, my mother said. Under that, the missionary began. A quadrant, a tin cannikin, several sticks of tobacco, 2 brace of very handsome pistols, a piece of bar silver, an old Spanish watch, and some other trinkets of little value, mostly of foreign make, a pair of compasses mounted with brass, and 5 or 6 curious West Indian shells. I have often wondered since why he should have carried about these shells with him in this wandering, guilty, and hunted life.